Hello class and welcome to week 6. We are almost to the halfway point, if you can believe that. So this week we are going to move forward and move to document design. Sorry, I'm looking for my PowerPoint. Okay, lost it somewhere. We are going to move to document design, and you're going to do a mini project for me this week. So in the book that we have now, the document design is chapter 11-ish. Some of it's in chapter 12, but we're going to talk about some of the graphics a little bit separately. Probably next week we'll do some work with the graphics, but this talks about more like spacing and some fonts and stuff. So talking about the design and where to put things, not so much the creating graphics, but placement of graphics and the designing of the actual document themselves, how to put the design portion of the documents, how you would space things out and all that kind of thing. So when we're talking about documents, again, sort of reminding you guys that we're not just talking about a piece of paper, but like on this particular one, I wrote interface just to sort of remind you that it can be a website, web space, that kind of thing. So anything that is in front of you that helps you access information, anything that helps you access information is what we're referring to as a document. Maybe at some point they will invent a new word that makes it easier for technical communication to talk about it in that sense. I mean, obviously, before prolific use of computers, it was all just documentation, but it's still used in that kind of wording. But we also have other words like sites and interfaces and that kind of, right, like user-friendly interfaces, GUIs, stuff like that. But with the use of phones and tablets and laptops, computers, and that kind of stuff, so many of our sources, the way that we get to information is through a type of interface in between us and the information. So it's a different way of looking at it. So I put both up there to kind of let you know we're talking about both. We're not just talking about paper design, but any of it. All of these rules apply to both and all and any way that you need to access information of any kind. That's what we're talking about. Okay, so let me get out my, because I like to scribble all over everything. It's just what I do. Oops, wrong color. Let me get my green out. Okay, so 5 principles of design, things to remember, and as we're going forward, obviously we're making more documents, so these principles of design will go with them. Sometimes it's going to be something you're going to use more in some types of documents than others. Obviously, when you're putting together documents that are going to be information and graphic heavy, some of this is going to be come in more handy than others. Or if they have some of the documents that you will be making already have formats that are in use, which is good. That's very handy, which helps you put things together because there's already an accepted format that helps you sort of just put things in place, which is very helpful. Then you don't have to like build something from scratch totally because you have some kind of a template to kind of guide you. But even with templates, even with like kind of an open idea template, you still have to use design principles to kind of help you put your information into a template because your information isn't always going to fit perfectly. And I think some of you saw that even when you were building your resumes. So at this point we have, however many people we have in the class at this point, I go through and look at, resumes and everybody's looks different. Like literally every single resume looks different from the other. So despite the fact that there are templates available, everybody has a different looking resume. So that means when you're out in the workforce and somebody's going to be a hiring manager, they're still getting dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of resumes that all look very different. Is the idea behind them the same? Of course, you're going to have an area in a resume that has your name and your phone number and your address and your email, and you're going to have an area in a resume that has your work history, and an area in a resume that has your education history. And you might have an area that has, sometimes some resumes have a little skill zone, some of them have a little spot that highlights what you want to do. It just depends on the resume type, but they'll all have those other building blocks, right? So in that way they're always the same. But when they become very different is here, when you have very specific design principles in play. And that's when they start looking very different from each other, as how exactly did each one of these templates put these different sections together? What came first? How did your name and your address, your phone number, and email get put on there? Where is it? What came first? Your education background or your work history? And my recommendation to you is to always put what you have the most of. If you have a lot of education background but your work history is smaller, then put what shines the brightest up front. So if you have a lot of educational background and a lot of certifications and a lot of that kind of thing, put that first, because it's going to be the biggest section and it can make you, it highlights you heavily in that area. And you want to put your work history second, especially if you've just had one job or a couple of smaller jobs. Put that second, because you want to dazzle them at the beginning as much as you can, because they're going to read that first. And the chances are, if they're unimpressed at the beginning, they don't go forward. When you have businesses who may get, dozens or hundreds or who knows how many resumes, per day, per week, per month, whatever, yours has to stand out. And if yours doesn't, if yours is only 1/4 of a page, which I have had most certainly students turn in resumes to me that are 1/4 of a page, a half page long, you leave too much blank space and it doesn't look like there's anything on it, and they end up getting put off to the side or put in the trash can. And you don't want that to happen to yours. You want to figure out how to move things around in your space and make it look the best, keep them reading through that, so you present up front the part of your resume that shines the best when you can, right? Now sometimes you don't always have a lot to work with. Your work history is new, you're just getting to build it, and your education, you're just building that, so you may have to highlight something else like a skill set, a skill section, or something like that. So it just depends on what it is you can build and balance. All right. So that's why these principles of design become very important, because that's what you put to the outer world, and it keeps people moving through your material. So you want balance, right? You need some kind of balance, and that's kind of what I was talking about. The document looks balanced from left to right and top to bottom. You don't want something to feel top heavy, bottom heavy, left heavy, right heavy, where it feels like if it did have weights on it, like literal weights on it, that it would lean one way or the other, or it would fall over if it was an actual living, breathing thing, because documents grab people's attention, and you want to make sure that it's doing that for the right reason. If it's pulling someone's sight to the left or to the right or to the top or the bottom, you want to make sure that that was by design, that you meant for their eyes to continually be pulled to the right or to the left or the top or the bottom. So you need to make sure that the whole design balances out, and we'll talk about ways to do that. Alignment is the next principle of design, and like I said, we're going to go through these individually. Images and words on the page are aligned to show the document's structure and hierarchy. So there's nothing worse than going through a gigantic document that is nothing but words, right? I'm sure you guys, that's happened to you all at some point. You've picked up stereo instructions or a book, a textbook maybe even, that was poorly designed, and it's just a text wall and you're trying to find something in it, but you can't move through the information quickly because it's just a bunch of text. You don't have any kind of headings and subheadings, or if you do, they're so few and far between that you're still being forced to move through massive amounts of text before you can get to the pieces that you want. Now, if you're talking about reading like academic work that's long and has a lot of pieces in it, then you have to read, you do have to specifically read a lot of pieces in between. But even so, they usually are broken up into headings and subheadings. So you want to be able to move through your information because people are usually information miners, and even more so as time goes on, we've lost our patience as humans, and we want to get in there and get what we want and get out. If you want to read everything, you want to have the choice to do so if that's what you want. And if you don't want to, you want to be able to dive in and get what you want and get out, which a lot of you wrote about in the reading centered pieces that you did about what you looked at. You know, that this document's used for getting pieces and getting out. This document's used for reading everything more detailed. It just depends on what you're looking at. Grouping is the next one. Related images and words are placed near each other on the page. So this is part of a learning curve here, is principles of design. Is you don't want to use a picture or a graphic or something and you're like, well, this looks neat, and you place it so far away from the related wording that it's lost its purpose. That you're like, well, why is this picture like 2 pages later from where it was talking about this particular idea? And I have seen that many, many times, including in magazines, including in newspapers, including even in textbooks. So it's like, why would you put this picture, see figure 1, and it's like figure 1 is like 2 pages later? That's ridiculous. So you want to make sure that the related images and words are placed as close as possible near each other, because the images are there to visualize the wording, to back up the wording, to add something to whatever was being said. If it's too far away, then its purpose is gone. So you need to keep the grouping close. Consistency. Design features in the document are used consistently so the document looks uniform. So you don't want to have one part of the page in Times New Roman, one part of the page you've moved to Comic Sans, your headers on this part of the page are in this type of face, the next page you've changed all your headers to be bolded, every other one is in italics. So you need to make sure whatever design features you use, you are consistent. Because if you don't, and you just like playing around with, fonts and headers and white space and all this kind of thing, what you've created is not a fun document. You have created a messy document. So you don't want a messy document. You want to remain consistent because it makes a nice flow. Contrast. And I'll show you examples of contrast when we get to that page. Items in the document that are different look significantly different, because if not, without that contrast, first of all, then there doesn't seem to be a contrast if it was supposed to be for a point, or if we're talking about a color contrast to highlight something, you may have muddied the ability for the reader to even read it. And I can't even tell you, and I'm sure you guys have seen it, how many times I've seen websites that do that, even commercials that have done that. Years ago, there was like a year or so that DirecTV had their guides, their TV guides, their guides that you move through to find stuff on the channels were terrible looking. If you had any kind of a vision issue, which I do, and at that time it wasn't even anywhere near pronounced like it is now, or my vision issue is like it is now. But even then, I was like, what in the world? It was like the background color and the background and the color of the font made it very difficult to read if you had even slight vision issues and you weren't like really close up to the TV. So you have to think about how that's going to work, or if you're willing to just dump out a very large portion of the people that could read it. All right, so let's talk about balance first. What does that even mean? So you want to think about weighting guidelines, as in not I'm going to wait in a line, but as in weight, like using weights to like weight lift, but adding weight to things like this thing weighs more than this thing, right? If you think about your document or your interface, whatever it is that you're building up, as some things weigh more than others, all right? It will kind of help you as you're going along and you're building your documents, whatever you're building, because certain things have more weight to them. And that kind of helps you know if, is this all balancing out? Because that's exactly how it feels to a reader, even though they don't know why, but that is just how it feels. So items on the right are heavier than items on the left. And a lot of that has to do with just a natural way of how we read left to right. How many people have a tendency to be more right-handed than left-handed and use their right for more things. And just like I said, more of a how we read in English left to right. So we always end on the right. We always end on the right. We always end on the right. We're always on the right. So if you have more things on the right, you have a tendency to always be looking on the right and you have more things over there. So things on the right make your document feel heavier. They have more weight on the right. Items on the top weigh more than items on the bottom, all right? So that's because we start up there and it gives more weight up there. So you see that like even on this slide, there's a big color band up here. Now, if I wouldn't have had that up there and I would have just had the word balance up there in a different color, but had a huge color band down at the bottom, it wouldn't feel the same, right? It would feel more like it's holding it in place at the bottom and everything's coming up. But being at the top, it has a different kind of weight to it. Big items weigh more than small items. I think that is, makes sense because that's just the way it would be. So that's pretty common. Pictures weigh more than text, which I think you can imagine that, right? Text is just words put across there, but as soon as you put any kind of a graphic in there, it grabs people's attention. It grabs people's eyes. So all of this is about attention getters, for better or for worse, because sometimes this isn't what you want. You don't want people's eyes to constantly be drawn away from what you're doing sometimes. And you may not want it to feel this imbalance, all right? So pictures weigh more than text, graphics weigh more than text, and often we just start referring to pictures and graphics as the same thing. It depends on what book it is. Colored items weigh more than black and white items because they're always going to get your attention in a different way than a black and white item is. Items with borders weigh more than items without. So that's like a big thing. So sometimes people don't realize that as soon as you put a border on something, you have pulled a different kind of weight to it and a different kind of attention to it than if you left it without a border. So it depends on how much weight you're trying to add to it. Think about that's adding more to it, which makes it heavier, all right? Irregular shapes weigh more than regular shapes. So if you have just a circle or a square, that's one thing. But if you're going to have like this star shape, or this really weird octagon, that's going to be something different. Our eyes adjust to them differently and go to them differently. Items in motion weigh more than static items, which I think you can imagine if you've ever been to a website that's super busy or just a website that you want to read something on, but there's constantly some motion down in the corner because there's some stupid advertisement that keeps popping up. It's annoying, right? I mean, at first maybe it doesn't bug you, but if you're still reading on the same page for like 5 minutes or something, after a while, it's annoying, okay? It becomes annoying. A long time ago when the GIFs, I'm trying to think of a different way to say that, because if you don't know what that is, when JavaScript and all these different kinds of animated features and stuff first were super, super popular to just easily be put into people's personal websites were coming out, and you could easily put them in there. Everybody wanted them in there. Everybody wanted, I want that on my website. I want that on my website. It lasted for about a year, and people started wanting them taken off because they were annoying. It was like, okay, if it was something really small and subdued, but if you had a lot of big chunky things, first of all, it was horrible for the people that had to visit your website because it could crash it if it was too much. But it was also annoying. It's like there's just too much busy work. You're trying to sit there and pay attention, but too heavy. All right. All right, still with balance, using grids, you can use grids to balance a page out. So depending on, like, especially if whether you're building a web page or you're building just a page, you're thinking about like a newspaper article, or you're just thinking of an article, just like you're writing something, or you're putting together pretty much anything really. An advertisement even, you could think about like grid lines, wow, this is like the worst grid line thing ever. You could think about how grids might work, in that heavy balance, if it helps you to think about, what do I have over on the right hand side? What do I have over on the left hand side? What do I have at the top? What do I have at the bottom? Have I balanced things out? If it's hard for you to kind of eyeball it, thinking about the weights of things. Using other balance techniques, margin comments. Sometimes there's different like interfaces or even in newspaper and article type layouts and advertisement layouts that will have like those build outs, like in the middle of the text. There will be like all of this text going on across a page, and then there will be like a margin comment or a sidebar or like a pull out in the middle. There's all sorts of techniques that you can use. Banners, like a top banner or a bottom banner. So there's all sorts of different things that you could use. Navigation bars, like Blackboard, obviously we have a navigation bar down the side. Some things use navigation bars across the top. So it just depends on what you're building, but it could even be on a print page. Lots of print pages will even do that. Textbooks will do that. Some of them will have navigation bars across the side and the top and the bottom, just to kind of let you know where you're at. So it can help you add balance inside of a page and add more character to it than just the text wall of doom, right? And help you add more to it. And we're also talking about how that works with, text and graphics as well. Alignment, using vertical alignment, margins, indents, headings, it allows you to create multiple levels of text. So again, this is helping you with not just keeping it nice and aligned, right? So that it's easy to move through. The whole idea here is to make it visually pleasing and easy to access, and that it feels like it has like this actual physical feeling to it as you're handling it, whether it's physically handling it or you're just visually handling it on a screen or you're just reading it or whatever. But you need to be able to move through it and want to move through it and not just put it off to the side because it looks just god awful and it's bothering you to try and deal with it, and people will go find a different way to deal with it. So you want to make sure that the margins, you don't want text. We have margins right here. You can see that there's margins. And you want to keep those margins and keeping a bottom margin to some extent where possible, so that it doesn't feel weird to not have some margins at all, and keep those always. And like even here, it's like there's clearly levels of use, right, with the bulleting, and that lets you move through material. It's like this is a PowerPoint, but even if it wasn't a PowerPoint and it was texting or a text based document only laid out for you, the indenting lets you know that it's a different level of headings. Same in a textbook or anything. It lets you move through it and understand, is this underneath this? Is this an example of this? And have we moved on to a different idea? So if you open up our textbook or any of your textbook for any of your classes, you should be able to move through a well-made textbook and find what you need. The information should be put in headings, subheadings, that kind of thing. Same with graphics. Graphics should be part of a vertical alignment and still kept in that alignment to kind of help you move through it, or offset in ways that make sense and look visually pleasing. This helps create those multiple levels of text to help you move through the information and to get it across to you. Centering is okay for headings, but you don't want to center align text, right? Headings, good, good to center, headings sometimes, but you don't want your text to be center aligned, because then it looks like you're writing an epic poem. And grouping, like we kind of talked about at the beginning, it's also referred to as using white space. So don't just think of grouping as putting your information together, like this is grouping, right? And this is grouping, thinking about how the headings are being used. But it's also how you leave white space, right? It's like there's a bunch of white space here. There's some white space here. We have white space over here. So sometimes it's about the space you leave open. How much space is there? So I think a few weeks ago, I'm trying to think like at the beginning of the semester, how much I adjusted some of the other PowerPoints. It's like these are PowerPoints that I made from an old book. The PowerPoints that came with our new book, which I just had gotten my new book in PowerPoints right before the semester started because the publisher was super slow. So I didn't have time to go through and adjust any of the PowerPoints or add my own stuff to them before the semester started. So I just popped it open and started going through it because I just finished reading that chapter and how they put that chapter together. Those PowerPoints were not very well made, which is sort of sad considering it came from a technical communication book, which I wrote them about. Their white space use was terrible. Everything was crammed up towards the top, and there was gigantic white space left in the middle, which is not what you should have in a PowerPoint. If you don't have that much information and you're going to leave gigantic white space, then maybe you should use bigger font, you should add graphics, you should maybe combine two PowerPoint slides. Then if that's all you had to say was like one thing, then you should make a whole slide for it then. So white space makes a difference. You don't want your reader, your peruser, your visitor to your site, whatever it is you're making, to feel that they're lost in your white space. But at the same time, you don't want to leave no white space at all and make them feel like everything is crammed. So thinking about how your white space is used in making it your friend. So margins, space around a list, area between the image and the body of text, an area between images, right? You don't want that crammed up feeling. And I have to say that sometimes I get proposals and everything gets crammed in there. It's like people are afraid to have a next page. That's really weird because there's no page count on the proposals. So you can go and go and go and go and go and have as many pages as you want. Stretch that thing out. Keep your white space nice. But sometimes people will cram everything in there and leave no spaces between anything. Cram all the graphics like all up inside of here, up against everything, and it looks terrible. It's like, don't do that. Don't crowd up your stuff. So think about how your white space is being used. You don't want it to feel like a messy room. So use headings and levels of headings like we have up here. Stay consistent, right? How you use your wording, how everything looks, what colors you're using, what font you're using, how you're doing your bullet list. Don't switch from bullets to number lists. You do one or the other. Use borders and rules. That will help a lot, if that's what you're going to do. Don't switch from one to the other, though. Stay consistent. Oh, wow, I got ahead of myself. So consistency, they should remain consistent. Whatever you're making, right? Headings should be predictable because that's what helps people move through it. If you're trying to get through something and you're like, I really want to go find how to make this cup of coffee, or how to sew this, or how to make a fly for fly fishing, or whatever it is you're trying to do, it's going to be really difficult if 5 pages in the writer completely changed how they did the headings, and you're like, wait a minute, what's happening right now? So you want to make sure that your headings stay predictable so that it helps your user move through your document. Pages should follow the same grid, as in, are you going to make, if this was your document, I know this is like my terrible drawing, are you using a grid where you're just going from one side to the other? Or are you, if this is your document, maybe your grid is like this. You're using columns, right? Like newspaper columns. I mean, could you imagine if you picked up a newspaper and they wrote all their newspaper articles all the way across the paper? Nobody would ever read it. They have to use columns, right? 2 columns, 3 columns, 4 columns, whatever. And sometimes right in the middle, they'll interrupt it with a picture, a graphic, a call out, something. So what kind of a grid, that's what they mean by grid. What kind of a grid are you using? And Microsoft Word lets you set up multiple grids and columns, like 2 column, 3 column, 4 column, whatever. You can set up multiple types of columns to break up the information so it doesn't look like an essay. Because you don't, unless you're writing an essay, you don't want it to look like an essay. Only essays should look like essays. Page numbers should appear in the same place on each page, whatever that is, right? Whatever that is, wherever you're going to put it in the same place. Lists should consist of bullets, or numbering schemes should be the same, which I said in the last thing. Okay, so let's for just a moment talk about typefaces. So I had told you guys to experiment with your fonts, which I'm all for font picking. I like my fonts too. So a little bit of Word, like typefaces. Interestingly, I'm just looking at this right now, and it doesn't have, this is not serif. Interesting. That's actually not serif. I wonder why it changed. That's really interesting. Okay. Okay. I'm sorry. I just like totally sidetracked myself. Okay, so typefaces, there's serif and sans serif typefaces. I'm just trying to think if I want to type on this thing. I'm actually going to, give me 1 second, because there's no point in showing you something that doesn't have it on there. Eek. So, I'm trying to see if I have a serif somewhere else. Okay, I do. Okay, so give me a second. We'll get to that one. So, whoops. So serif and sans serif, what that means is, because this is serif right here, but serif will have like extra little pieces on the letters. It's usually like little tiny block pieces on it, like it'll have like a little, like, it'll be fancier looking. Wow, that's so terrible looking. Times New Roman is a serif typeface. And it just means it has like little extra pieces that come off of the letters often. Like a little extra fanciness to it. That's all it means. It has extra, and you can usually tell by the H's, is why I used H. So I don't know what happened to my H right here, because it should have like a little block piece on the very ends of it that show that it's a serif typeface. So it's really the big question of, do you want to use a serif or a sans serif? So sans serif, like Comic Sans is a sans serif typeface, and it doesn't have anything on the ends. It's either totally blocked and blunt at the ends, or sometimes it's rounded at the ends. And there's a lot of controversy about what to use and which one's easier to read. If you're using like short pieces and you're just like making big headers for headings that are short, sometimes sans serif is good because sans serif is often easy to read in short snippets, like having a just a heading or a big heading. Sans serif is easy to follow and it doesn't matter. If you're going to use a lot of text that's going across, and you're trying to get people to follow a lot of text, then serif is usually better because the little kind of break pieces on the ends, those little tiny extra flaps that are there on them, help keep people reading across. It gives like a line that goes across like a natural reading guide. Okay, that's kind of the idea for why to use or not use serif or sans serif. The only thing I will also say about sans serif typefaces is be careful about the type of sans serif because they're also seen as informal. Serif typefaces are usually a lot more formal looking because they're a little more kind of quote unquote fancy looking sometimes. So like Bookman and Book Antiqua, stuff like that. They're a little more formal looking. So when you're writing something that may be a little bit more formal and you want it to be taken like a little more seriously or formal, like perhaps your resume, then you may not want to use sans serif. So you don't want to write your resume in like Comic Sans, which is maybe Comic Sans is like a cool typeface, a cool font, but it's probably the extreme, version of sans serif because it looks like very childish looking. It's fun though. I like sans serif. I mean, I like Comic Sans, but I have seen people turn in resumes in Comic Sans. You don't want to use Comic Sans for your resume because that's exactly what it looks like. Unless you're turning it in to a nursery school or something, but even then you're still trying to get a job. So I would be very careful about the sans serif fonts for something serious like a resume. Now when you're building documents and you're building, things like that, then it depends on what it's for, right? It depends on what you're building it for as to which one is appropriate or not. So just think about the appropriateness of the serif or the sans serif, all right? Oh, geez. See, I got ahead of myself again. I'm sorry. So serif, often used for formal or traditional type text, especially the body. Some studies suggest that some serif fonts like Bookman are more legible than sans serif fonts because they create lines. So you know how much I've read this stuff over and over again. Sans serif, this is a serif font right here. I used serif to write this. And you can kind of see that when you use a lot of it, it helps you kind of move along the lines because you kind of have these little extra fancy pieces on the bottom. If you guys can see along the bottom how there's like feet on the bottom of the F and the N and even the S. There's like these little extra pieces on the very bottoms of the letters. That's a serif font. So this is a sans serif font right here. Sans serif often used in more informal or progressive documents, depending on what you're writing. So notice that the bottom of all the letters are just flat, right? There's no extra little quote unquote feet. Sometimes they'll call them feet because these are flattened out, right? Notice the bottom of the the bottom of the F and the bottom of the N. It's flat. It made it like a flat foot. But these are, made it like elongated. But these don't do that. It's blunt on the bottom. It doesn't like give those little feet on the bottom. Often sans serif is used as headers, footers, captions, and titles because then it gives you a sense of a different type for the heading and the footers and the captions, all right? So think about what you're using it for. That's my only thing. So still with consistency, labeling your graphics. Tables, charts, pictures, graphics, and graphs should all use the same label system and be located in the same area. Certain document creators and things, whatever you're using, A lot of them have their own system in it. Depending on what you're using, you can right click and it'll let you label the graphic or label the picture. So that helps a lot. Creating sequential and non-sequential lists, right? Just make sure you're staying consistent. So are you going to do, you should be using sequential, that these are numbered lists like 1, 2, 3, 4. If you're doing ordered steps, so do this step first, number 1, do this step second, number 2, if they have to be done in order. So only use bulleted lists if there's no ranking order or it doesn't matter which step comes first, right? You're just naming a list, but there's no rank, there's no order, there's no importance of what needs to come first. Headers and footers can make a document feel pulled together and consistent. They may include the company info, logos, etc., which you guys have in your memos that you've been moving through and using for certain things, depending on what we're doing throughout the semester in your letterhead, right? It's at the top and it pulls something together. It puts it at the very top of the document. So here's that contrast thing I was talking about earlier. Contrast makes item look distinct and different. So it can be really great. It could work for you. It could make something pop, which is good, and that's what you want. And it could actually ruin things. So you have to be careful when you're using it and how you're using it. Think about the contrast, right? Shading and background color. The whole thing is we've moved away from essays. This isn't about essays. This is about every other kind of document or information in the planet except essays. So be careful about putting dark text on a dark background. It makes it difficult to read. That's why I said the thing about the DirecTV ordeal. But there's many ways to highlight text, right? So this gray, this one is like this gray on black. That's borderline. That's kind of hard to read. Now, if you're looking at this on a big screen right now, like I am, it's not too bad. But you know, it's like for my screen right now, this thing is like 5 inches wide. So it's like it would be very difficult for me to not see it. But if you're looking at it on a regular size screen or you're looking at it on your phone, it may be difficult to read. Gray on black is not a good idea. If this was written in white, it might stand out better. This pink on purple thing, not so good. A long time ago in a galaxy far away, I had a personal website back in the days when I used to make websites for people. And I had my own website before there was a Facebook, and even before a lot of people had MySpace. And my own personal website, for whatever godforsaken reason, I liked to do either pink on purple or I would write purple on black. Until a bunch of my family members wrote me and said, I can't read that. These were older family members. And they're like, I would really like to read the news on your website, but I can't read your writing. Now, younger members of my family had no problem with it. Older members of my family couldn't read it. The contrast was difficult. So I changed it. And I went black on an off-white color. And then they could read it just fine. So it's about thinking about who are your readers, who are you reaching out to, and how difficult is that. These are thin, spindly letters on this purple background, and this is pink. Maybe if they were big, thick pink letters on the purple, it would be just fine. So these big, chunky white letters on the blue, this looks great. This is good. The black on white looks fine, but you can highlight text in other ways. You could just make the text a whole different color. You could bold it. You could put it in, underline it. You could italics. You could make it bigger in a different font in the middle of something, whatever. Or you could just change the color of it in the middle of the sentence. It's your document. It depends on why you're highlighting the text. There's lots and lots of different ways to do it, and it just depends on what you're doing. You're not writing essays in here, so however you're trying to highlight the text or make a point in the middle, there's a lot of different ways that you could do that. Font size and line lengths, 11 or 12 point font sizes are the easiest to read. It depends on which font you choose, because some fonts are bigger or smaller in 11 or 12, right? Which if you flip through and play with your fonts in your Word, in Microsoft Word, you'll see that some of them are easy to read in 11 or 12, and some of them are way too small in 11 or 12, and some of them are pretty chunky in 11 or 12. It just depends, all right? It depends on the text. So we all know about the fine print in documents, so be careful. It depends on what the purpose is. Large fonts above 14 should be used for special purposes. Line lengths make a difference too. Think of a newspaper and imagine if all the articles were not put into columns. Yeah, you would fall asleep. Nobody would read across those. It would be too much. So the columns makes a big difference. Ooh. So homework. The homework, let me get back. Down at the bottom, the document redesign. So you're going to create a document. In fact, you're redesigning a document. Whoa, sorry. Didn't realize I was way off to the left there. You're redesigning a document. So this document was already made. You're repurposing this document because it was originally made for, well, I'll pull it up and then I'll tell you because that's just silly to talk about it. This was originally like a chapter for a scientific journal, let's say. And not like a journal, but like not, what was I forgot where it came from. IPM for scorpions in schools, but it was like this chapter into out to a more serious minded, and you know, it's heavy. Let's just say that. Right? And it's big. It's like nobody needs this much information. So let's say that you were asked to put together a like one pager to help people at the elementary school understand what to do about the scorpions that have. That's the wrong thing. Hang on a second. I think I just messed this up for you guys. Hold on. Sorry. I totally did. Oh, okay. It is there. Sorry. I was just making sure. It's like sometimes I do the mosquitoes and sometimes I do the scorpions. Okay, so the scorpions. All the information is here, and it's about scorpions in the schools, but it's too long. It's like nobody's going to read all this. Look at all this. There's like the introduction, the identification in biology, and then it goes into this big old long thing, avoiding scorpion stings. And then it's like you go back, whoops, then you go down, and it's detection and monitoring. I mean, it's super long. Traps, chemical controls, and then you have to go back up to the top, and it's like stings and management options and habitat modification, first aid of scorpion, and then there's this gigantic bibliography. Nobody cares about. Okay, that's just way too much. It's this long thing that's a little more scientific-y, a lot of information for the school district. We don't care about all that. I want you to take this document and also there's like one picture in it and that's it. It's like the most boring thing ever. They did use two. The one good thing about it is there is at least one picture. Notice that they did use headings, which is good. And they did like break out, use columns, thank God. And they did use a shading on one side. So they did use design. There's a lot of design in this. It's a really, really well-made document for what it was made for, which was to send this to the school district to talk about options for the scorpion problem that they were having. The thing of it is the school district is like, we can't give this long thing to hand out to all the parents and the teachers, you know, as a one-page flyer at the school. Because what is the information really that is going to be important to send to home with the kids to understand about the scorpions at school? Do you think that they want to know the biology and all this long involved stuff and all the management options and all the habitat modifications? Do you think that they really need to know all that junk? Probably not. So when they're trying to deal with the scorpion problem on school grounds at the elementary school, what is it that they really just need to know? What is it that the parents and the kids just need to understand at the basic for a one-page handout at that level, right? We don't need all this scientific stuff. You don't need the bibliography, right? So it's a one page. You need to redesign this as a one page flyer of informational flyer, all right? That's easy to understand information, and you're going to only end up with very small amounts of using this information. Because this is a PDF and you can't like copy paste out the information out of here, in case you didn't want to retype it, although I just took all the information from it and put it into a Word document format in case you wanted to use it that way, but you would still have to, you know, reformat it. I don't know what you want to do with the information in case you don't want to retype it. But it is here. So I gave you it both ways, but I wanted you to be able to see it in its original form, okay? So this was what the school was given. The school district was given as a report, which is fine for the school district level. But now you need to warn the parents about the danger of the scorpions, but they don't need all of this information. So what's the best way to get the information out to the parents of the elementary school kids, and for them to be able to also talk to their kids about it? But what information do they need? Now remember, I do want to see some graphics in there, at least one, maybe two, all right? Get a couple graphics in there, and you're using, the whole point of this endeavor is that you're going to be using these design, whoops, sorry, I didn't mean to flip that. Your principles of design here, okay? So have fun with it as much as you can for it being a homework assignment. Put in there what you think is needed. I'm not asking you to pull new information. I'm giving you all the information. You can just repurpose the information, what you think you need out of here, right? What's going to be the most important to the parents. Use whatever kind of color schemes you want. You could redesign the page, what you want to look like, the background, the color, because it's going to be printed out as color flyers. So if you want to use whatever colors you want, borders, headers, footers, whatever, I don't care, and put it together like that, then that's great. So let me open up a Word document here. Open up a fresh Word document just to show you where that design, no, that's not what I wanted. Layout. So under layout, there's a button that says columns, and it will let you use whatever you want, right? 1, 2, 3, and then it'll show you left, right, or more column designs. So it'll let you kind of figure out how you want to design it, and you could do custom, right? And it shows you how you want to do this, right? So it's kind of cool, and you can put lines in between. It has this bar to put lines in between, and to help you kind of customize what you want to do, however you want to do that. You can put the line in between that. However you want to put this thing together, it's fine with me, okay? But they have to have the information in it that works, and it will kind of help you deal with that, right? And you can view it. There's add-ins, and there's the fonts, there's the effects. You can do your whole page color is over here. You can change the whole entire page background. There's borders, right? And there's different types of borders. So play with it, right? Shading, borders, whatever. Play around with it. See what you like. Do some inserts. We'll talk more about inserting graphics and stuff, but this is just a start. That's why I'm like at least one graphic in it, which is you do insert and then pictures, or you could do insert and online pictures, and just type in scorpion. So insert online pictures, right, and then type in scorpion, as long as you have internet access, and it'll pull up all sorts of pictures for you. Right, and then you can just click it, and then you can manipulate this and put it where you want to put it. And like I said, we'll do more with graphics next week. But at least this is getting you started. moving forward with this and getting something done. And remember to use your header space to put the title of the document up there. This is not going to be done, this particular document redesign is not going to be done on your memo paper, on your memo letterhead, because this is something that is not just for me. This would be as if it would be turned out to a school, so you don't want this on company letterhead, okay? The other part of your homework, let me get out of here. Let me get out of all of this. The other part of your homework is on your memo, and all this is you telling me I want to work by myself or I want to work in a group for your proposal that's due at the end of the semester. We have not talked about your proposals yet, other than what I said about it last week, and that is, you know, whether or not you want to work alone or not by yourself. At this, you know, at this stage, there's about, I think, 10 people left in our class. We had a couple people drop because I don't know what happened to them. They just kind of disappeared. So what do you want to do, right? I can't promise that there will be anybody that's, if only one of you chooses to work in a group, then I can't force anybody else to work in a group, so you won't be able to work in a group. But you know, you could try if you want to try to do a group thing. Most of the time people choose to work by themselves, but every once in a while somebody chooses a group. So, you know, you can give that a whirl if that's what you want to do. If you want to work by yourself, then you can work by yourself. I need to know, because we'll start talking about it over the next couple of weeks and moving forward on that in the background, because I'll introduce the proposal probably in a couple of weeks, so that you could start having that in your head, and we'll start talking about topics, because that's not going to be something that we just pop in there and throw out in a week or two. That's something that we'll work on in chunks in the background. So I want to make sure that you know if you're doing it by yourself or not, or if there's going to be a group, that the group is together. So it helps me kind of figure out how I'm going to talk about it. So I need to know by the end of this week whether or not you're going to work by yourself. So that you can just send me a memo on your letterhead, company letterhead. I wish to work in a group for this, or I want to work by myself on this. And I would like you to tell me why. Everybody always has a reason why they want to work alone or why they want to work in a group. So just tell me why. So then, you know, I feel more justified in giving you a few points for it, that you said something more than one sentence, and that it's on your letterhead, which may be ever changing. If you had decided you changed some fonts or something in it, that's fine. And this one, even though your redesign isn't due until next Sunday, as it always is, I would really like to get your answer about the group or no group by Friday or Saturday at the latest, because it'll make a difference on how I put together the content for the following week. So I do have this one due a day earlier, which I know is different, but it makes a difference on putting stuff together for the next week. As always, questions, please ask them. I know I made last week's assignment a little more convoluted than I intended to, but I'm always happy to answer any questions that you guys have and clear up any confusion that I created in the interim. So please ask them. I'm so happy that you guys reached out and asked questions when I made it confusing. So let's move ahead.